Chapter 2. The Angel of Death. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon over King's Row when Company 8 received the call from Overwatch Prime Command. It came through encrypted channels, marked with priority codes that made even Captain Obi straighten in his seat. Shinra watched his captain's expression shift from relaxed to focused in the span of seconds as he listened to the voice on the other end. 3 weeks. That's how long Shinra had been with Company 8. 3 weeks of patrols, of small skirmishes with null sector forces, of learning to work alongside his new teammates. 3 weeks of feeling like he was finally making a difference. He'd stopped 14 fires, rescued 37 civilians from collapsed buildings, helped Arthur hold a defensive line against null sector bastions long enough for evacuation transports to extract 200 people from a surrounded hospital. His feet had carried him faster than he'd ever thought possible, flames propelling him through danger with the confidence that came from years of training finally being put to use. But this call, whatever it was, felt different. "Understood," Obi said into the comm. "Company 8 will deploy within the hour. Yes, sir. We'll coordinate with the local Overwatch teams upon arrival." He ended the transmission and stood, his cybernetic limbs humming softly as he moved to the center of the common room where the rest of the team had gathered. Shinra had been practicing his flame control with Maki when the call came through, learning to balance precision with power, to channel the fire through his feet in controlled bursts rather than wild explosions. Arthur had been running sword forms in the training area, his blade catching the early light. Tamaki had been on kitchen duty, mercifully without incident. Hinawa had been cleaning his weapons with the methodical care of someone who treated his tools like extensions of himself. And Iris had been in her meditation chamber, the soft glow of her optical sensors visible through the doorway. Now they all stood at attention, waiting. "We have an assignment," Obi began, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Priority protection detail. The client is Tekhartha Mondatta, the Shambhali monk and Omnic rights leader. He's delivering a speech at King's Row in London tomorrow afternoon, a public address calling for peace and understanding between humans and Omnics." Iris's optical sensors brightened slightly at the mention of Mondatta's name. Shinra knew enough about Omnic culture to understand why. Mondatta was a legend among awakened Omnics, one of the few who had survived the Omnic crisis and dedicated his life afterward to bridging the divide his people's violence had created. His speeches drew thousands, his words carried weight in United Nations debates, and his message of peace had earned him both devoted followers and violent enemies. "Threat assessment?" Hinawa asked, already pulling up data on his tablet. "Extreme," Obi replied grimly. "There have been 3 credible assassination threats in the past month. Anti-Omnic extremist groups, null sector operatives who view him as a traitor to their cause, and..." He paused, his expression darkening. "Talon." The name hung in the air like a curse. Talon, the terrorist organization that had attacked the Overwatch Museum all those years ago. The shadow conspiracy that operated across every continent, pursuing goals that remained frustratingly unclear beyond general chaos and destabilization. They'd been relatively quiet since Overwatch's reformation, but intelligence suggested they were rebuilding, recruiting, preparing for something big. "Talon hasn't made a major move in months," Maki observed, her tactical mind already working through scenarios. "Why break their silence for Mondatta?" "Unknown," Obi admitted, but Overwatch intelligence has intercepted chatter suggesting they've acquired a new asset, someone they're calling the White Angel. No confirmed identity, no photographs, no concrete intel, just rumors of a sniper who never misses and leaves no trace. Shinra felt something cold slide down his spine. A sniper? He'd trained against long-range threats at the academy, learned to use his mobility to avoid predictable patterns, to never stay in one place too long. But a sniper who never missed? That was the kind of reputation that made even the fastest target vulnerable. "So we're bodyguards," Arthur said, and there was something in his tone, not disappointment exactly, but perhaps a knight's frustration at defensive rather than offensive action. "We're protectors," Obi corrected firmly. Mondatta's speech could shift public opinion in favor of Omnic rights legislation that's been stalled for years. If he dies, especially in such a public way, the backlash could set peaceful integration back decades. This isn't just about saving one life, it's about saving thousands of future lives that could be lost in the violence that would follow his death. He let that sink in before continuing. We deploy to London immediately. We'll be working alongside the local Overwatch team. Tracer will be primary protection, we're secondary and perimeter control. Our job is to identify threats before they reach the speech venue, and to provide additional security during the event itself. Tracer. Shinra's heart skipped. He'd be working alongside the woman who'd saved his life, who'd inspired him to become a hero. Would she remember him? Would she even care that the terrified 12-year-old she'd rescued had followed in her footsteps? Kusakabe. Obi's voice cut through his thoughts. You're on rooftop patrol during the speech. Your mobility makes you ideal for rapid response if something goes wrong. Boyle, you'll be with Tracer in close protection. Your shield training will be valuable if we need to cover Mondatta. Arthur nodded sharply. Yes, sir. Maki, Tamaki, you're with me on crowd control. Hinawa, you'll be counter-sniper. Find an elevated position with clear sightlines and watch for any threats. Iris. He turned to the Omnic nun, his expression softening. I know this is difficult. Mondatta is important to your people, but I need you clear-headed on medical standby. If things go wrong... I understand, Captain, Iris said quietly. I will do my duty. But Shinra could see the subtle change in her optical sensor's glow, the slight tremor in her usually steady hands. This wasn't just a mission for Iris. This was personal. They deployed within 45 minutes, loading into one of Overwatch's high-speed transports, a sleek aircraft that could cross continents in hours. The flight to London was tense, each team member preparing in their own way. Hinawa disassembled and reassembled his rifles 3 times, checking every mechanism. Maki ran combat scenarios on her tablet, memorizing the King's Row layout. Arthur meditated with his hand on his sword hilt, murmuring what might have been prayers or might have been Reinhardt's teachings. Tamaki tried to sleep and failed, her cat-ear hair tufts twitching with nervous energy. Iris sat by a window, watching the world pass below, and said nothing. Shinra tried to calm his racing heart by reviewing the mission parameters. King's Row was a historic London district, the site of a famous Omnic crisis battle, and later the location of brutal anti-Omnic riots. Mondatta choosing to speak there was itself a statement, a declaration that peace could be found even in the places most scarred by violence. The speech would take place in the plaza outside the restored St. George's Church, a space that could hold thousands of people, thousands of potential threats. Thousands of angles for a sniper who supposedly never missed. His feet began to smoke unconsciously, flames licking at his boots. Nervous? Maki asked, settling into the seat beside him. Shinra tried to force his manic grin into something more confident. I'm fine. It's a big assignment. It is, she agreed, not sugarcoating it. But that's why Obi requested you specifically. Your reaction time is the fastest I've ever seen, Shinra. If something goes wrong, if there's a shot, you'll see it before anyone else. What if I'm not fast enough? Maki was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then you'll be not fast enough alongside the rest of us. This isn't a solo mission. We're a team. You don't have to carry everything yourself. It was good advice, logical, the kind of thing they drilled into him at the academy. But Shinra couldn't shake the feeling that on this mission, seconds would matter. Split seconds. The difference between a target acquired and a target saved. And he'd be damned if he'd let anyone die on his watch. They touched down at the Overwatch watchpoint in London just after sunset local time. The facility was smaller than Gibraltar, but no less impressive. A converted military base that had been restored as part of Overwatch's reformation efforts. The Union Jack flew alongside the Overwatch emblem, a visible symbol of the organization's new mandate to work with nations rather than superseding them. A reception team met them on the landing pad, led by a woman who needed no introduction. Lena Oxton, Tracer, stood barely 5'4", but commanded the space like someone 3 times her size. She wore her signature orange jacket and white pants, her chronal accelerator glowing softly on her chest. her brown eyes bright with the kind of energy that seemed to refuse sleep on principle. She was grinning as Company 8 disembarked, but Shinra could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand never strayed far from her pulse pistols. "Company 8, welcome to London!" Her accent was pure Cockney, cheerful despite the circumstances. "Heard you lot have been doing good work in Tokyo. Glad to have the backup." Obi stepped forward, extending his cybernetic hand. "Captain Obi, thanks for coordinating with us on this." "Wouldn't have it any other way, mate." Tracer shook his hand firmly, then turned to address the rest of the team. Her eyes passed over each member: Hinawa, Maki, Tamaki, Arthur, Iris, and then landed on Shinra. She paused, stared. Her eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Bloody hell," she breathed. "You're the kid from the museum, the one who grabbed Doomfist's gauntlet and went after Widowmaker like a miniature lunatic." Shinra felt heat rush to his face that had nothing to do with his flame abilities. You remember?" "Remember? Love, I told that story for years. The bravest 12-year-old I ever met, I'd say. Got shot and still smiled like he'd won the lottery." Tracer's grin softened into something more genuine. "You joined up then? Became a proper hero?" "Trying to, ma'am," Shinra managed, his manic smile splitting his face despite his best efforts to appear professional. "None of that ma'am rubbish. It's Lena or Tracer. Take your pick." She looked him up and down, noting the Company 8 insignia, the way flames flickered unconsciously around his boots. "And you got yourself some proper powers now, too. Fire manipulation?" "Ignition ability," Shinra confirmed. "I can generate flames from my feet, use them for propulsion and combat." Tracer's eyes lit up. "Oh, we're going to get along brilliantly. Another speedster on the team. Emily, my girlfriend, she's always saying I should find more people who understand the addiction to going fast." The ice broken, the rest of the introductions proceeded smoothly. Tracer led them into the watchpoint for a full mission briefing, complete with holographic layouts of King's Row and real-time intelligence updates. The plaza where Mondatta would speak was an oval space approximately 200 meters across, surrounded by 3- and 4-story buildings on all sides. Church on the east side, shops and residences on the north and south, a museum on the west. "Plenty of elevated positions for a sniper," Hinawa observed, his tactical mind already plotting angles. "The museum roof has the best sightlines. If I were planning the shot, that's where I'd position." "Which is exactly why you'll be there," Tracer agreed. "We've also got security in every..." "Plenty of elevated positions for a sniper," Hinawa observed, his tactical mind already plotting angles. "The museum roof has the best sightlines. If I were planning the shot, that's where I'd position." "Which is exactly why you'll be there," Tracer agreed. "We've also got security in every building with roof access, but with the crowd size we're expecting, estimates are up to 5,000 people now. We can't lock down every window. Some of these are residential. We can't exactly evacuate the entire district." Obi studied the hologram, his expression grave. "What about Mondatta himself? Has he been informed of the increased threat level?" "Oh, he knows." Tracer's voice carried a mixture of respect and exasperation. "Knows and doesn't care. Says fear of death is no reason to abandon the path of peace. Very zen, very stubborn." "Brave," Iris said softly from where she stood at the edge of the group. Everyone turned to look at her. Her optical sensors were fixed on the hologram of the plaza, on the podium where Mondatta would stand exposed and vulnerable. "He is very brave." "That he is," Tracer agreed gently. Then, louder, back to business. "Right, final positions. Hinawa, you'll be on the museum roof with our counter-sniper team. Kusakabe, you're running rooftop patrol, fill perimeter, eyes on the crowd and the buildings. If you spot anything hinky, you alert immediately and move to intercept. Boyle, you're with me in close protection. That shield training Reinhardt gave you, you'll be using it. Obi, Maki, Tamaki, crowd control and secondary response. Iris, medical station behind the church." "Questions?" "Yeah," Shinra said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This White Angel, do we have any intel beyond never misses?" Tracer's expression darkened. "Not much. 3 confirmed assassinations in the past 4 months, all high-profile targets, all killed in public spaces despite heavy security. No pattern to the locations, no recovered bullets. Whatever rifle they're using, it's not standard. Witnesses report seeing a figure in white before the shots, but descriptions are all over the place. Young, old, male, female, nobody agrees. A ghost, Maki murmured. Or someone very, very good at not being seen, Obi countered. Which makes them dangerous, but not invincible. Everyone stays alert, everyone watches their sectors. And if this goes south, priority 1 is getting Mondatta to safety. Understood? A chorus of affirmatives. They had 12 hours until the speech. 12 hours to prepare for an enemy they couldn't identify, using a weapon they couldn't predict, from a position they couldn't anticipate. 12 hours to get ready to save a life that could change the world. Shinra didn't sleep. The morning of the speech dawned gray and cold, typical London weather that threatened rain but never quite delivered. By 10 a.m., crowds were already gathering in the plaza, Omnic and human alike, carrying signs calling for peace, for understanding, for an end to the violence that had plagued their communities. Security checkpoints had been established at every entrance to the plaza, but they were cursory. Scanners for weapons, visual identification checks, nothing that would catch a professional who knew how to blend in. Shinra took his position on the rooftops at noon, 2 hours before the speech was scheduled to begin. From 4 stories up, the plaza looked like a living organism, constantly shifting as more people arrived. He moved between buildings with ease, flames propelling him across gaps, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of place. Arthur stood at ground level, positioned just behind and to the left of the podium where Mondatta would speak. He'd been fitted with a portable barrier projector, similar to Reinhardt's, scaled down but still capable of deflecting small arms fire. In his dress blues with his sword at his side, he looked every inch the knight he imagined himself to be. Tracer flickered in and out of visibility nearby, her chronal accelerator allowing her to blink through space in eye blinks, checking and rechecking security positions. Hinawa had established his nest on the museum roof, his rifle assembled and calibrated, his eyes hidden behind tactical optics that could pick out a face from half a mile away. Shinra could see him occasionally through the scope glint, a deliberate choice, making himself visible to any other snipers as a warning. I see you. Try something and I'll put you down. The crowd continued to grow. By 1 p.m., the plaza was packed. Thousands of bodies, human and Omnic, pressed together in anticipation. News drones circled overhead, broadcasting the event live. This would be Mondatta's largest audience yet, not just the people present, but millions watching around the world. All stations, comms check, Obi's voice came through their earpieces. One by one, each member of Company Gate reported in. Then the local security teams. Then Tracer. 20 minutes to speech start, Tracer announced. Mondatta is in the security room behind the church. He'll proceed to the podium at 1400 hours exactly. Everyone keep your eyes open. If the angel is here, they'll make their move during the speech. Maximum chaos, maximum casualties if we fail to stop it. Shinra landed on top of a residential building on the north side of the plaza, crouching at the edge, his eyes never stopping their scan. Faces in the crowd, windows in the surrounding buildings, rooftop access points, anywhere a sniper could hide, anywhere a threat could emerge. The minutes crawled by like hours, 1400 hours. The church doors opened, and Mondatta emerged. The Omnic monk was tall and slender, his chassis painted in shades of gold and white, his faceplate serene and somehow wise despite being inorganic. He wore flowing robes in the style of Buddhist monks, and he moved with a grace that suggested deep inner peace. Behind him, barely visible, Arthur and Tracer flanked his path to the podium. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, thousands of voices rising in greeting. Mondatta reached the podium, raised his hands for silence. The crowd quieted, expectant. "My friends," he began, his synthesized voice carrying across the plaza through carefully positioned speakers, "I come before you today not as an Omnic speaking to humans, or a human speaking to Omnics, but as one consciousness speaking to others. We are all children of this earth, all deserving of peace, of understanding, of love." Beautiful words, powerful words. the kind of message that could heal wounds decades old. Shinra barely heard them.
His entire focus was on the crowd, the buildings, the angles. His body was coiled tight as a spring, ready to move at the first sign of threat. His feet smoked constantly, flames ready to propel him in any direction at a heartbeat's notice. For too long, we have allowed fear to define us, Mondatta continued. Fear of the other, fear of those who are different, fear of change itself. But I tell you, fear is the path to darkness. Fear leads to anger, anger to hatred, and hatred to violence without end. 3 minutes into the speech. 4, 5. Shinra's eyes burned from not blinking. He was aware of his heart hammering, of sweat running down his back despite the cold, of every nerve in his body screaming that something was wrong. But where? Where was the threat? We must choose a different path, Mondatta said, his voice rising with passion. We must choose to see the consciousness in each other, to recognize that suffering is universal, that joy is universal, that the desire to simply exist in peace is universal. This is not naivety. This is not weakness. This is the hardest choice of all, to remain compassionate in a world that demands cruelty. 6 minutes. 7. Hinawa? Obi's voice in the earpiece. Negative. No suspicious movement. No scope glints. If they're here, they're better than anyone I've ever seen. 8 minutes. Mondatta was building toward his conclusion, his message of peace resonating across the plaza. The crowd was enraptured. Even the news drones had stopped moving, hovering in place to capture every word. That's when Shinra saw it, a flicker of white on a rooftop 3 buildings south of his position. There and gone so fast he almost thought he'd imagined it. But his instincts, honed by years of training, sharpened by his ignition abilities' enhanced reflexes, screamed at him that it was real. Movement! South sector, 4-story residential, northwest corner. He was already moving, even as he called it in, flames erupting from his feet as he launched himself across the gap between buildings. The response was immediate. Hinawa, cover south, Obi barked. Moving! Arthur's voice, tense. I'm blinking to Mondatta. Tracer. Shinra hit the target rooftop in a roll, came up with his feet blazing, ready to engage. But the rooftop was empty, except for a glint. Scope glint. Not on this building, on the one behind him. Northeast corner, exactly where Hinawa's attention would have shifted away from when Shinra called in the false contact. It had been a decoy, a lure, something to draw the counter-sniper's focus for just a few seconds. It's a fake! Real contact, northeast, 6-story. The shot came as he was turning, as his warning was still leaving his lips. He saw it, actually saw it with the enhanced perception his ignition ability granted him. A streak of something white and pure cutting through the air, moving faster than any bullet he'd seen in training. It was coming from the northeast, just as he'd spotted, from a position that had been in shadow, invisible until the moment of firing. The trajectory was perfect, aimed not at Mondatta's center mass, but at his head, targeting the cognitive processors that would ensure instant death rather than injury. Time crystallized. Shinra could see Tracer blinking toward the podium, could see Arthur beginning to raise his barrier, could see Mondatta still speaking, still unaware. Could see that the shot would arrive a fraction of a second before any of them could intercede. Unless... His body moved on pure instinct, flames exploding from his feet with enough force to crack the rooftop beneath him. He launched himself not toward the shooter, but toward the shot. His trajectory calculated in the milliseconds he had available, his entire being focused on one impossible goal: get between the bullet and Mondatta, take the shot himself, be the shield, be the hero. He was going to make it. His angle was good, his speed was enough. He would intercept the shot with his own body, and Mondatta would live, and that was all that mattered. That was what heroes did. The second shot came from a completely different angle, southwest, from a building they'd cleared, from a position that shouldn't have existed. Shinra saw it in his peripheral vision, saw the white streak, saw that it was aimed at him, at his trajectory, predicting where he would be.
The shooter had anticipated his heroism, had counted on it. And in the fraction of a second he had to choose, Shinra made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He twisted in midair, let his flames alter his trajectory, dodged the shot meant for him, saved himself. And the first shot, the one he'd been planning to intercept with his body, continued unimpeded. It struck Takartha Mondatta in the center of his faceplate with a sound like a bell tolling. The Omnic monk stopped mid-sentence. His hands, raised in a gesture of peace, trembled. His optical sensors flickered. And then he fell. The plaza erupted into screaming chaos. Shinra hit the roof of a building on the opposite side of the plaza, his landing uncontrolled, his mind unable to process what had just happened. He looked back toward the podium and saw Arthur's barrier finally raised, far too late. Saw Tracer materialize beside Mondatta's fallen form. Saw Iris sprinting from her medical station, her robes billowing. Saw the Omnic monk's optical sensors go dark. "No," Shinra whispered. Then louder, "No, no, no!" "Kusakabe, report! What's your status?" Obi's voice in his ear, tight with controlled panic. I saw the shot. I tried to. There were 2 shooters. I couldn't. Where are they? Give me positions." Shinra forced his mind to function, forced himself to look at where the shots had originated. Northeast building, 6th floor, and southwest building, 4th floor. He could see them now, could see the windows where the shots had come from. Both were empty. No scope glints, no movement, no sign anyone had ever been there. But on the southwest building's rooftop, illuminated in the gray London light, was a figure in white. Shinra's breath caught. The white angel stood at the roof's edge, unmoving, clearly visible now that the job was done. From this distance, he couldn't make out details, but he could see the slender build, the white clothing that seemed to glow against the gray sky, the long rifle held loosely in one hand. And then the figure moved, turned, looked directly at Shinra across the plaza, across 200 meters of empty air, raised their free hand in what might have been a wave, or a salute, or a challenge. Rage exploded in Shinra's chest like a supernova. His feet erupted in flames, so intense they melted the rooftop beneath him. He launched himself toward the White Angel's position with every ounce of power he possessed, crossing the distance in seconds. His entire world narrowed to one single purpose: catch them, stop them, make them pay. He hit the rooftop where the angel had stood with enough force to crater the surface. Empty. The figure was gone as if they'd never existed. No trace, no footprints, no evidence of how they'd arrived or departed. The only thing Shinra found was a single white hair, long and fine, caught on the edge of a ventilation unit, fluttering in the wind. He grabbed it with shaking hands, held it up to the light. It was real. Proof that someone had been here, that he hadn't imagined it. Proof that he'd failed. "Kusakabe," Tracer's voice through the comms, and it was the saddest sound Shinra had ever heard. "He's gone. Mondatta is gone. The shot hit his central processor. He died instantly." The white hair slipped from Shinra's fingers. He stood on the rooftop where his enemy had stood, surrounded by thousands of screaming people, in a plaza painted with the consequences of his failure, and felt something inside him shatter. He'd been fast enough to see the shot, to track it, to intercept it, but he'd chosen to save himself instead. He'd chosen wrong, and the world would burn for it. The aftermath was a blur of chaos and recrimination. Security forces flooded the plaza, searching for suspects they'd never find. The crowd dispersed into panic and grief, humans and Omnics alike weeping for the loss of a voice that had promised peace. News broadcasts showed Mondatta's final words on loop, his message of compassion cut short by violence. Company 8 regrouped in the Watchpoint's briefing room 3 hours later. Nobody spoke as they filed in. Arthur's face was ashen, his hand never leaving his sword hilt, as if he could somehow fight the guilt away. Tamaki's eyes were red from crying. Maki sat stone-faced, her tactical mind clearly running through every decision, looking for where they'd gone wrong. Hinawa cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision, his expression unreadable. Iris had shut down entirely, her optical sensors dark, her frame motionless in a corner. Captain Obi stood at the head of the table, his cybernetic hands clenched so tight the servos whined. "This wasn't anyone's fault," he said quietly. "This was a professional operation executed by someone, or multiple someones, with skills beyond anything we anticipated. We did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. That's the ugly truth of this work. Sometimes you do everything right, and people still die."
"I could have saved him," Shinra said. His voice was hollow, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I was going to intercept the shot. I had the angle, I had the speed. But there was a second shooter, and they aimed at me, and I dodged. I chose to save myself instead of taking the hit." Silence filled the room like poison gas. "You'd be dead too if you hadn't," Maki said finally. "You can't intercept 2 shots from 2 different angles simultaneously. It's physically impossible." "I could have tried." "And died for nothing," Obi said firmly. "Shinra, listen to me. You made a split-second decision under impossible conditions. You chose to survive. That's not cowardice. That's basic human instinct, and there's no shame in it." "Mondatta would have taken the shot," Shinra countered, still not looking up. "He would have sacrificed himself. That's what heroes do." "Mondatta was a monk who'd spent decades preparing for death," Tracer interjected. She'd been standing by the window, looking out over London, but now she turned to face the room. "You're a soldier who's been in the field for 3 weeks. You're not required to die for your ideals before you've even lived them." But her words rang hollow to Shinra. He could still see it, that perfect moment where he could have made the difference, where his body between the bullet and the target would have mattered. He'd been fast enough, strong enough, just not brave enough. "Did anyone get a look at the shooter?" Hinala asked, dragging the conversation back to practical matters. "Confirmation it was this White Angel?" Shinra reached into his pocket, pulled out the single white hair he'd recovered.
Placed it on the table. "They were on the southwest building. I saw them after the shot, wearing all white. Slender build, maybe 5'8" or 5'9". They saw me coming and disappeared before I could engage." He paused. "This was all I found." Obi picked up the hair, held it to the light. "We'll send this to analysis. Maybe we can get DNA, narrow down an identity." He looked at Shinra, and his expression was gentler than the situation warranted. "You did good work today, Kusakabe. You spotted the decoy, called it in, moved to intercept. The fact that you survived an engagement with a sniper of this caliber is impressive in itself. A man died." "Yes," Obi agreed quietly, "and that's a weight you're going to carry. We all will, but carrying it doesn't mean letting it crush you." He addressed the whole team now. "Everyone get some rest. We fly back to Tokyo in the morning. This mission is over." But it didn't feel over. It felt like it was just beginning, like they'd stumbled into something far larger and darker than a simple assassination. As the team dispersed, each member heading to their assigned quarters to process the day's trauma in their own way, Tracer caught Shinra's arm. "Wait," she said quietly. "I want to show you something." She led him through the Watchpoint's corridors to a room he hadn't seen during the initial tour, a memorial hall lined with photographs of fallen Overwatch agents. Hundreds of faces looked down at them from the walls, each one representing a life given in service to protecting others. "You know what the hardest part of being a hero is?" Tracer asked, her voice soft and sad. "It's not the fighting. It's not the danger. It's the people you can't save." She gestured to the walls. "Every one of these people died protecting someone. Some of them succeeded. Their sacrifice saved lives. Some of them failed, died trying, and the person they were protecting died anyway." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were ancient despite her youthful face. "You think because Mondatta died, your actions today didn't matter? But you're forgetting something. That plaza held 5,000 people. When the panic started, you know how many died in the stampede?" Shinra shook his head numbly. "0. Because you were up there on the rooftops, directing people, using your flames to block off dangerous exits, guiding them to safety. Because Arthur held his position and kept the stage area clear. Because our team did exactly what we were trained to do in crisis conditions. Her hand squeezed his arm. Mondatta died. That's a tragedy. But 5,000 people lived. And that, Shinra Kusakabe, that's what being a hero looks like. It doesn't feel like it. It never does, Tracer agreed. The ones we can't save always weigh more than the ones we can. But you don't get to choose which ones matter. They all matter, the dead and the living. And the living still need you. She left him there in the memorial hall, surrounded by the ghosts of heroes past, and Shinra stood in the silence, trying to believe her words, trying to believe that he hadn't failed completely, trying to convince himself that the manic grin splitting his face despite the grief, his body's betrayal of his emotional turmoil, didn't make him a monster. That night, alone in his quarters, Shinra pulled out the photograph he carried with him always. It was old, creased from being handled too many times, but the image was still clear. His mother, standing between him and Sho, all three of them smiling at the camera, taken the morning of that trip to the Overwatch Museum 12 years ago. The last photograph of his family intact. "I'm sorry," he whispered to their frozen faces. "I'm trying to be the hero you believed I could be. I'm trying to protect people, but it's so much harder than I thought. Everyone I try to save, I see you, see Sho, see all the people I've already failed." The photograph offered no answers, no comfort, just the reminder that the world kept taking things from him, and the only thing he could do was run faster, burn brighter, push harder.
Be better. Be enough. Outside, London mourned. By morning, the anti-Omnic riots would begin. Exactly the violence Mondatta had spent his life trying to prevent, unleashed by his death. Null Sector would use the assassination as recruitment fuel. Extremist groups on both sides would claim vindication for their hatred. And somewhere out there, the White Angel moved through shadows, another impossible shot added to their legend. 2 shooters, coordinated angles, perfect prediction of his movement. Someone who fought like they could see the future, or like they knew him well enough to predict his choices. That white hair haunted him. Something about it felt familiar in a way he couldn't articulate, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to come into focus. Shinra lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, and made a new promise.
"I'll find you, White Angel. I'll stop you. And I'll make sure no one else dies because I wasn't fast enough." The fire in his chest burned cold and determined. The hunt had begun, and Shinra Kusakabe had no idea he was hunting his own brother.